Hi, my name's Chris Bowe. I'm a regional intelligence analyst here at Intelligence Fusion, and today we're going to be talking about the Golden Triangle and drug trafficking in Southeast Asia. So the Golden Triangle literally is the area where Myanmar, Thailand and Laos all border each other, but in sort of a wider sense of the word, it's the main drug production centre of Southeast Asia, and it's an area where sort of while television shows such as Narcos or Breaking Bad have sort of highlighted the role of drug production and trafficking in Mexico and Colombia, actually an equal amount of drugs are made in the Golden Triangle, and there are still quite high levels of violence associated with it. Drugs produced in the area were thought to have created a profit of about $71 billion in 2019, and these drugs are shipped all across Asia and the world. So primarily there's two types of drugs produced in the region. The first is opium, which is primarily grown in Myanmar, which is in fact the second largest producer of opium in the world after Afghanistan. In particular, the Wa region of Shan State is the primary centre for opium production, and this opium is cultivated and then processed and turned into heroin, which is transported across the world. More recently, however, methamphetamine has become a major export from the Golden Triangle, and the drugs labs in the region have produced both crystal meth and also yaba, which is a local variant, which is a mix of methamphetamine and caffeine, which was originally given to horses when involved in strenuous work. So when looking at the type of groups involved in the drugs trade in the Golden Triangle, it's not quite the same as the Western Hemisphere, which has quite a significant gang culture. Instead, while there are gangs in the form of triad, which is sort of the Chinese and Japanese equivalent of the mafia, there aren't sort of the same violent confrontations between these gangs and the police, or the high levels of, say, murder that you see associated with northern Mexican cities. Instead, these drugs trade can be associated, in fact, with some of the insurgent groups and rebel groups in the region, especially in Myanmar, while there are also gangs associated with the destination countries. So in Australia and New Zealand, for example, you've got biker gangs who are heavily involved in the drugs trade. But yeah, again, it's not really the same as the Western Hemisphere in regards to the type of groups involved. While there is a gang culture associated with it, it's nowhere near as pronounced. So looking firstly at opium is a much more simple story because the climate is right there, and opium poppy can just be grown in northern Myanmar, so you're not having to import anything. And as for sort of exporting the opium and the heroin, because Myanmar has such a large and sort of open border, it's a very porous border, drugs can very easily be smuggled into its neighbours. It's a bit more tricky though when looking at methamphetamine production. The main reason for this is because Laos, Thailand and Myanmar, none of them actually have the major chemical industry that you need to produce methamphetamine. Fortunately though, neighbouring China acts as an ideal source for these chemicals because it's got a huge chemical industry. In this regard, so your traditional precursor chemicals, such as ephedrine and pseudoephedrine, those are legal in the region and therefore are quite easily seized. But drug traffickers have shown a sense of adaptability and now import actually semi-legal or completely legal chemicals, such as propanol chloride. And these as such aren't seized so much and can be shipped by land through sort of Myanmar, Vietnam, Laos, or by sea into the busy ports of Thailand, and then just move north through Thailand towards the mountainous areas. And once these drugs are produced, they can then, as previously mentioned, go across the porous borders of the nations in the region, and these land transits include south down the Malayan Peninsula, eastwards into Cambodia and Vietnam, or even into Yunnan state in southern China. But you do also see quite a lot of drugs being shipped by boats through the ports of Thailand or by air through the various airports, and that's how the drugs tend to reach further nations such as Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, or sort of eastern Chinese cities such as Hong Kong. So attempts to stop the drugs trade are quite significantly hindered by just how remote and politically unstable the main centres of drug production are. So as such, there's no real attempts to stop the drugs really being produced. They can try and seize some of the precursor chemicals, but as previously discussed, that can be quite difficult, especially when they're legal. However, there has been quite a lot of success by law enforcement personnel in actually intercepting traffickers when they're trying to export drugs. And these seizures range massively from sort of seizing individuals carrying a couple of hundred yaba pills in their backpacks, all the way to vast seizures in shipping containers where they're hidden amongst manufactured goods, and these seizures can occur either before drugs are shipped away from Thailand or upon arriving in countries like Australia and New Zealand. However, a reasonably unique element of the Golden Triangle and the drugs trade is the high level of fatal clashes that occur between traffickers and law enforcement personnel, with this violence often, in fact, being initiated by police. So in particular, looking at the Philippines, President Duarte has been incredibly open about his willingness for police to use extreme force. And while media outlets still report often that police would, say, kill traffickers after being fired upon, most human rights groups agree that, in fact, these events are fabricated, that police have been killing unarmed traffickers and then planting evidence in order to justify their actions. And you see a similar thing actually in Bangladesh, in the Cox's Bazar region, which borders Myanmar, where frequently police clash with traffickers, and this quite often was associated with the Rohingya crisis, with many refugees bring drugs across the border with them, or drug trade happening in the refugee camps, and this often was met with a lethal response by Bangladeshi police. And this has led to the UN and the EU to condemn the government of Bangladesh and to encourage their law enforcement personnel there to abide by the rule of law. So looking at recent events, the two biggest that have affected the Golden Triangle obviously is the coup in Myanmar and also the COVID-19 pandemic. So looking first at the coup in Myanmar, it sort of affects it in three ways really. The first is the fact that the coup means that the governing body, the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar military, are now having their forces spread thin across the country, having to fight the various insurgent groups and to maintain order in the major cities. Because they're spread so thin, basically combating drug trafficking is the least of their priorities. So that allows traffickers to smuggle drugs with impunity effectively. Secondly, because of the rise of the number of refugees fleeing Myanmar, it creates new avenues for smuggling drugs out of the country. And as previously mentioned, the Rohingya refugees were previously associated with drugs trafficking, and the same is believed to be happening with new waves of refugees fleeing the conflict. So that provides an opportunity for traffickers to get their drugs out of the country. And then the third and final element is the fact that for various rebel groups, who tend to be based in the isolated areas where drugs are grown, they basically need to find a way to fund their opposition and to pay for arms. And there has been evidence that, in fact, they are now working with drug traffickers or supporting it simply in order to make money and be able to keep up their fight. So all three of those elements massively increased and assisted in the drugs trade. COVID-19 has a slightly more mixed story rather than being completely good for the drugs trade. So initially it had a sort of dampening effect on the drugs trade due to the increased border restrictions and basically the end of air travel. While this meant that initially it was harder for chemicals to be imported or drugs to be exported, very quickly drug traffickers had adapted to this, and by May 2020, Malaysian authorities were starting to report large amounts of, little boats being used to transport drugs, which were then being seized off the coast of Penang. And this level of adaptability meant that very quickly drug traffickers were able to bounce back from the virus and continue their trade. And in part they were assisted by the fact that a lot of people who had lost their jobs due to the economic consequences of the virus were now willing to get involved in the drugs trade in order basically to earn an income and live. And this meant there were more people available to transport small shipments of drugs, and as such the drugs trade was able to continue to operate. However, in the long run, the sort of size of the drugs trade in the Golden Triangle area in Southeast Asia is believed to be directly tied to the economies of the nations in the region. So while economically the countries have suffered slightly due to COVID-19, there is expected to be a bounce back. These countries will again begin to grow and prosper, and as such, in the long run, it's expected that the drugs trade will continue to grow in parallel with the economies.